Hello everyone and welcome to Sundays with Sean. I'm Sean. Today is Sunday. Today we are going to be talking about box cameras. I started building box cameras back in 2018 as a hobby, and it's grown into an even larger hobby. Today I would like to share with you some of what I have built. First up is, what is a box camera? And to me, a box camera is a camera inside of a clearly marked box. Also, to me, a box camera is anything with a lens. So if it doesn't have a lens, to me, that's a pinhole camera, not a box camera. Here is our first camera. So this camera has a 3mm aperture. It shoots at f/60, and I use 5x7 paper negatives or enlarging paper as my film of choice. This camera is made out of foam core board. Taking around the sides, first we have the front, and there should be some type of shutter mechanism there, but it's not. It was just a guillotine style shutter that simply slid open and closed. Neither side has anything on it. In the back, we have a little door that opens up, and you can see the ground glass. This is the only camera that I have a ground glass for, and it is pretty useful. I did enjoy using it. On this side of the camera, we do have these two little latches. Once we unhook those, it pops open. On the inside, we have a 3-chambered system. We've got one chamber to hold unexposed film. We have another chamber where the film gets exposed, and then finally a third chamber to hold the exposed film. And when I say film, what I'm talking about is paper negatives, otherwise known as enlarging paper. That is what I use as my film. I may call it film throughout this process when talking about my cameras, but just know that if I do, I'm talking about paper negatives. How this particular camera worked is there is a folding film holder. And what this will do is I would put my paper onto the film holder, and I would slide it up and press it against the ground glass. The lens is over here in the front. I would expose my paper, come back, unfold it, take the paper out, and put it into the chamber that's meant for holding exposed film. So that is roughly how this camera worked, and I do say roughly because this camera worked fairly roughly. During the course of me using it, it did develop some pretty bad light leak, so I had to stop using it, and since then I've taken a few of the parts out and gave them to other cameras. So here's one of my favorite photos that I took while using this camera. The second camera on the docket is this one right here. This one is made of wood, and it's actually made of 2 project boxes from Jo-Ann Fabrics that have been pushed together. On the front here is another shutter mechanism. This I like to call the nose because to me it looks like a nose. All this is a PVC pipe and a PVC pipe cap. Moving around to the right side of the camera, you can see 3 hinges. The back is a bit of a decorative plate. The left side of the camera has some sight lines here. Because this camera has no ground glass like the previous camera, we have to draw sight lines to help us frame our photo. It also has a clasp to where we can open and close the camera. The top also has sight lines to help us frame our image. Coming back to this clasp, how you load this camera, you simply, what I like to call, break the camera. Pop it open as such. On this side, hopefully you guys can see the magnifying glass and also what I call the aperture disc. On this side, we have the film holder. Everything is made out of wood, including this film holder. It shoots a 4x4 piece of paper negative. You simply slide the film into the slot and then slide the film holder back up into place. And on this side of the camera is a magnifying glass, the same type of magnifying glass in my previous camera. And you can see in there, hopefully you can see anyway, there's a piece of aluminum from a tin can that I used to make the aperture disc from. I want to say that this aperture is about 20mm, maybe 10, somewhere in that range. It's pretty large because I had the idea that I was going to shoot portraiture with this inside, so I needed something larger. But this camera has an f-stop of 21. Again, it's a really fast camera. It's really hard to use outside in bright sunlight. You might have noticed with this camera that there is no place to store film inside of the camera. So how I solve this issue is I carry around film in a separate film canister. This is set up the same way as my cameras that have this built inside of it. It's got 2 chambers, one for exposed film and one for unexposed film. So here's one of my favorite photos that I took using this camera. If you guys are enjoying this video, you know what to do. Hit like, hit subscribe. It would mean the world to me if you did so. Next, I have a camera for you that I never finished, and I'll tell you why after I get done talking about it. So on the front, we can see our familiar nose. This camera has a 3mm aperture. Again, this camera has no ground glass and there's no sight lines because, as I've stated before, it is unfinished. So how you load this camera is not from the top like our first camera. It's not from the middle like our previous camera. It's going to be from the back. This is our entire film holder and holding chamber assembly right here. I've got my two chambers up top, one to store the unexposed film and one to store the exposed film or paper. This is going to shoot 3.5 by 5 paper negatives or enlarging paper. As I said before, this camera has an aperture of 3 millimeters and it shoots at f/36. The reason that this camera is unfinished is because it did me wrong and I've since sent it to exile. I just finished building this mechanism where it comes apart. I just finished everything. I was really excited to use it, so I took it out into the field. As I was shooting with it, the back part had slid open. When you tilt it at just the right angle, it becomes very easy for it to slide open. On my very last image, I was walking around and the back had slid out just enough to where the sun was able to get into the exposed paper chamber and ruin all of the pictures that I had taken with it, besides just one. So as I mentioned before, here is that one photo that I've taken with this camera. Last but not least is this camera here. This is an extra lid that I need to finish because this lid is kind of failing on me. Working our way around the camera, you might have noticed that we have two different noses on it. That's because this camera here is actually two cameras in one. We have the box camera side, which has a lens, and we have the pinhole side, which doesn't have a lens. And I'll cover the pinhole side in my next video. So on one side of the camera, depending on which way you look at it, on the left side of the camera, you can see that there are some sight lines. On the top, we also have some sight lines. And on the right side or left side, depending on which camera you're using, more sight lines. Again, we have our nose that acts as a shutter. This is for the box camera and also for the pinhole side. The camera also uses a 3 millimeter aperture, and I shoot at f/36 because this lens is the sister lens to the one in this camera. This lens and this lens came out of the same pair of binoculars, which was really nice because I had built this one first. I knew everything that I needed to about this particular lens, so it was really just sort of copy, paste, drag and drop, however you want to say it, into this camera. So this one, like the first one, has a lid to it. The inside of this camera is actually pretty interesting because instead of having 3 chambers, you actually have 4 because of 2 cameras. This chamber here, we're exposing film. This chamber here, we're exposing film. And in the middle, we have our chambers to store unexposed and exposed film, or paper negatives. Again, for this camera, like my other ones, I'm using a piece of aluminum as my aperture disc. The camera shoots 3.5 by 5 paper negatives. And this is the camera that I use the most. Partly why I saved it for last, but it's partly why I also haven't built any other box cameras since. This camera has been really reliable, it's been really good, and I just can't seem to get away from using it. Here are 3 of my favorite photos that I've taken using this camera. Well guys, I hope you like my box cameras. They're really fun to make, and it's definitely the things that I enjoy most about this style of photography is that you can make your own cameras and go and shoot with them. If you guys have any questions about the cameras that you saw today, please leave a comment. I'd be happy to answer any and all questions about them. As previously stated, I'm going to be going over my pinhole cameras next, so be on the lookout for that video. That's all I got for you guys on this Sunday. Thank you for watching and be kind to one another. Have a good one.